Today we'll start talking about density functional theory. So far we have discussed about different approximation schemes, for example, Thomas Fermi model, and then we have talked about Born-Oppenheimer approximation, then Hartree and Hartree-Fock approximations, those things. So eventually, all of them give a good description of many electron system. However, none of them are complete, and hence this method of density functional theory came into picture, and it is quite extensive and has been in use for quite some time now. So, in this technique, you can actually have the freedom to choose system specific functionals and potentials, and as a result, it is possible to get a much closer description of the system, uh, what you get usually in the experiment. So, this theory was originally developed, I think, in 1970s by two scientists, I think Walter Kohn and I think Sand probably, and they are awarded Nobel Prize because of this discovery. So let's see what happens here. So as the name suggests, so here we have this term that is called as. Okay, the color is different from what I like. Okay, maybe. Okay, just hold on a second. Delete this part. Okay. Okay. So, as I was saying, as the name suggests, this term is there that is called as density. So, what is this density? So, this is the density of electrons. Okay. And then we have this term that is called as functional. So, you all are familiar with the term function. So, let's say if you have some independent variable x, and then so let's say that is some set, and then if you are mapping it to another set of variables, okay, let's say y, so there is some relation which basically connects these two. So let's say this is called as fx. There is a function. So functional is basically it's a function of another function. Okay, so here it will be, let's say if I write it by y, so it will be like this. Okay, this is a functional. So in the case of function, you will have independent variable, and then you will get a dependent variable based on that. And then you also have to satisfy certain property. I think it has to be single valued and uniqueness, things like that. And this functional, of course, it's a secondary part which is coming thereafter. And the theory, of course, you know what is the theory. So this is a new development. So that is why this term is coming. Okay. So the major part here, why do we need such thing, is that let's say whenever we are talking about a many body system, so let's say typically if it's an n electron system, so then there will be, let's say, n number of electrons, of course, and these electrons, each electron has 3 degrees of freedom. So as a result, you will have 3n total degrees of freedom. Or let's say you can say that this many body wave function will be a function of 3n variables. Okay. So now, in simple terms, it is difficult. So we can, in principle, of course, write down 3n differential equations for individual electrons, but that is physically impossible. So here, instead of the wave function, there is another quantity which is introduced. So this is called as electron density, and this is denoted by this term rho, which is a function of r. Okay, and r is basically nothing other than x, y, and z. And these are the two scientists who first pointed out this concept that we are replacing the typical or conventional quantum mechanical wave function by this quantity which is called as electron density, and this is what forms the basis of density functional theory. And Next useful part is that here this thing that is called as exchange correlation functional that is introduced. So we have seen the what is the effect of exchange and correlation. So it's basically, since electrons are fermions, so they have to satisfy certain kind of like requirements. So it's not like bosons, so they cannot sit anywhere in any state. And so let's say there is Pauli exclusion principle that is there. So certain requirement have to be satisfied, and we have seen already that that's why stator determinant comes into picture. So no two electrons with exactly same quantum number can be in the same state. So here this exchange correlation functional, or let's say this potential term, which takes care of this thing, that is introduced, and that is the most significant contribution, or let's say addition, to this theory. And the output that we get from here will tell us the ground state properties of the system. So let's say usually when we don't have any external disturbance, then what sort of behavior that we expect? Let's say whether it is semiconducting or metallic, this sorts of behavior, or even magnetic behavior, different properties you can estimate actually. And usually the results are symbolic of the ground state properties of the system. Okay. Now, okay. So any question on this? Okay. So here, these two scientists, Hohenberg and Kohn, they have proposed theorems. So the first theorem, it says that. So here is the first theorem. It says that for any system of interacting particles in an external potential V external R, the potential has to be determined uniquely, except for a constant, by the ground state particle density rho naught r. Okay, so here it basically shows an one-to-one mapping between the ground state electron density and let's say the wave function of an electron system. And basically rho and wave function, they are one-to-one mapping. Now this theorem, it says that the system could be interacting. However, the external potential under which these electrons, let's say, are interacting, that has to be determined uniquely, which means that the functional form has to be unique. It cannot be 5 different forms. Okay, and that has to be precisely determined only by the ground state particle density. Okay, now let us look at the second theorem. So here it says that an universal functional for the energy, that is E, which is a function of rho, that exists, or let's say it has to be defined in terms of the density rho r, and it has to be valid for any external potential V external. For any particular V external, the exact ground state energy of the system is the global minimum value of the functional, and the density rho r that minimizes the functional is the exact ground state density, that is rho naught r. Okay, so here it defines the energy functional first, which means that E is a function of rho, and rho is a function of basically psi, and psi is also a function of r. So we have to define that, and E has to be a function of rho, and it has to be valid, or let's say we have to have some value of E for any external potential V external. Now, if we want to find the ground state energy of the system, then that has to be the global minimum value of the functional, let's say, and the density that basically minimizes this functional will be the ground state density. Okay, so it's basically kind of like an extremum method. So the E, which satisfies the ground state, or let's say that if I want to know the ground state energy, then I have to find out the minimum of this. How? So we have to take the derivative of E with respect to rho r, and whichever rho satisfies this, that will be the value. Okay, so we have this equation 1 and 2. So by satisfying, or let's say solving these two, we can actually get the value of ground state electron density and the ground state energy, so which are the basis two parameters, and from there we can calculate further what other useful quantities are required as per one's requirement. So here the true ground state density minimizes the total electronic energy of the system. So that is what we have learned here. Now we can define the total energy, and energy is a functional of rho. So E, which is a functional of rho, will be a sum of T Ni. So this is the kinetic energy term of non-interacting electrons, plus EHF. So this is the Hartree potential, or let's say Hartree contribution that takes care of the electronic interactions, plus EXE. So this is exchange correlation, plus E external, that is the external potential. Okay, so we have four different terms. So here only one kinetic energy term, and then three are mostly potential term. So one is this Hartree term, which you have seen earlier. Exchange correlation is something which I explained also, and E external is the external potential, which means that let's say there is a magnetic field or electric field, something like that. Externally, if it is interacting. Okay, so that is how you define the energy functional, and then you have to optimize this. So del E with respect to del rho, and then you have to find out which one is the ground state kind of like configuration. So this can be interpreted as the energy functional of non-interacting particles submitted by two external potential, which is V external and V exchange correlation functional. So here it says that, so if you remember the Hartree equation, it has kinetic energy term and the Hartree potential. Okay, so here you can also assume that there are two external potentials which are acting over the Hartree case. These are basically defined contributed by V external and V exchange correlation function. Okay, now this exchange correlation functional is defined by Vxe will be equal to Dexe by d rho, and the exact ground state density of a n particle system we can write it down like this. So rho r, which is a sum of all i's, that means all the electrons, will be equal to sum over I psi I star psi I, and psi I are basically single particle wave function of the quantum equation. Okay, so these individual single particle wave functions have to satisfy this equation, that is the Schrodinger equation, minus half del square plus V effective R psi I k s R will be epsilon I psi I k s. So these are called as quantum wave function also. So here this V effective is nothing other than the sum of three terms. So one is the external potential, then we have the Coulombic term, and then we have the exchange correlation function. Okay, and if we know these things, then actually very simplistically I can write down this equation or quantum equation as HKS psi I will be epsilon I psi I. So these are equations which single particle orbitals have to satisfy. Okay. Now let us see how exactly these calculations are done. So here these quantum equations have to be solved in a self-consistent manner with V external and rho r. Okay. So I have explained a little bit into this topic in the last class. So let us see how it is done. So we start with an initial rho 0 r. Okay. So this is the particle density. So here is basically how rho is defined here. So you start with a particular initial guess of rho r, and then that is used to compute the effective potential, which is a sum of these three terms: V external, V Coulombic, and then V exchange correlation function. Okay. Now external potential is given, so that is not changing. Coulombic potential is also more or less kind of defined for a given Z and N. And exchange correlation functional is something which you have a choice of. So I'll discuss two different types of exchange correlation functional later on. So here you have the choice of choosing this third term, and that is what basically gives you the difference of results and the degree of agreement between different terms. Okay, so whatever it is, let's say you have taken one particular exchange correlation functional. So you have these two other terms. So you sum up all of these three, and then you can actually compute V effective. Okay, so that is the total potential. So here you can see you need to have V effective if you have to solve this. And then you actually constructed the quantum Hamiltonian, which is basically a sum of the kinetic energy term and the effective potential, and then you solve the equation, which is HKS psi I will be equal to epsilon I psi I. Okay, once you do that, then as the solution you get psi I, and then from there you can again compute rho. So this is the final rho which you are getting here. Okay, so you can actually use this expression, equation number 5. So you started with a row, and then you are getting another row. Now you are comparing these two row, so row initial and row final. Now if these two row are let's say close to each other, or let's say they're equal, then you say that okay, I have whatever row you started with, that is the correct ground state row of your system. So you can then go ahead and use this row to calculate other quantities like energy, force, etc. If not, then what you do is that you take this final row back, and you mix basically input and output density, and then you replace this row 0 by row n, and then you do this exercise again, and then you keep on doing this until you reach some desired level of convergence. Okay, so that actually is defined. So you can actually set up this thing. Let's say if delta rho has to be like 10 to the power minus 5, or let's say 10 to the power minus 6 something. If you set this thing up, and unless your delta rho matches this criteria or this level of convergence, you keep on doing this calculation. So this is an iterative process, so it can go on and on several hundred steps and hours until you reach this thing. So once you reach it, then you know that you have correctly predicted the ground state electron density, and from there you can calculate other ground state properties of the system. Okay, so is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now let us talk about the exchange correlation functional, because this is something which I said that is system specific. Okay. So what is this? So as I mentioned earlier, so this takes care of the exchange effect or the exchange interaction and the correlation effect between different electrons. So earlier you have seen that we have taken this independent particle approximation, but finally we also explain that effectively we are mapping this many body problem as a one body, or let's say one electron problem. Okay, so it is not exactly possible to know that how individual electrons in a given material are experiencing different forces and like different exchange and correlation effect. So it's very difficult to know. Okay, so exact form of this energy term is difficult to predict actually. So again what we do is that we try to make some sort of approximation so that we get the best behavior, or let's say best prediction we can make. Okay, so this is again some sort of approximation which you have to do. So here are popular approximations which are actually used for defining this exchange correlation functional. So the first one is called as local density approximation, or LDA, and the second one is called as generalized gradient approximation, GGA. Now this list does not end here. There are hundreds of exchange correlation functional like meta GGA, and then like many are there. Okay, and there are also hybrid exchange correlation functional. So there the list is quite large. So depending on so basically for a different electronic system, some of them are specifically giving better result. Okay, however, these two are quite popular and they give quite good approximation for most of the systems. Okay, I'm not saying best, but good approximation. Okay, so that is why these two are quite popular. Now let us see what are these things. So let us first look at LDA. So as we seen that E, or let's say the exchange correlation energy term, it is a function, or let's say a function of rho. Now here the approximation that has been taken is called as homogeneous electron gas approximation. Okay, so that means that the distribution of electrons within a given atom is uniform. So we are not assuming any kind of inhomogeneity in the system. So as a result, rho, which is dependent on that, so the charge density will also be uniform for this case. So it's basically an uniform electron approximation. So this is kind of like a Fermi gas system which we have studied earlier also. Here this term EXC so X is exchange correlation and LDA is local density approximation, which is a function of rho, can be defined as integral of rho r then epsilon xc d cube r. So this is the volume over which you are integrating. So this epsilon xc, this is the exchange correlation energy of particle of a homogeneous electron gas. Now here other way you can say that they are assuming that the electron density distribution, it is not varying too rapidly. So if you remember that at one point I think when we are describing probably Thomas Fermi model, so there we have actually explained this scenario that the potential under which the Fermi gas system is acted upon, it is non-zero. However, the potential is slowly varying, and the typical length scale over which the potential is varying is much larger than the let's say de Broglie wavelength of the electrons. Okay, so here also this approximation can be used. So instead of this homogeneous electron gas, you can also assume that the electron density might be varying, but the variation is too low, or let's say it is not very much detectable over a like a length scale that we are interested in. Okay, so the variation is effectively slow, which means that this approximation works well for very small, or let's say when the electron density variation is not huge. Okay. So now, if we consider the spin degree of freedom, then actually this theory will name it as spin density functional theory, or SDFT. So here we will have the electron density, which is corresponding to up spins and down spins. So we can define the total density by this expression. Okay, so we have rho up and rho down, and then this LDA theory, which we are defining earlier, that will be replaced by LSDA. Okay, so this is local spin density approximation. Okay, so here EXCLDA, that will be a function of rho up and rho down separately, and you have to basically take care of them individually in the final integral. So that is how you take care of, you take into account the exchange correlation effect within the local density approximation. So it works quite well, but it has the disadvantage that sometimes it underestimates the lattice parameters and overestimates the binding energy. Okay, so lattice parameters, you know that ABC basically. If you have a unit cell, what are the dimensions in three crystallographic direction? Okay. So usually when we are talking about the ground state property, that means we are assuming that this is the most stable configuration or orientation of the system. Usually in density functional theory, you also end up with the ground state behavior effectively tells you the correct A, B, C values of the system. Okay. However, in the case of LDA, sometimes the lattice parameters are found to be little bit smaller than the actual value which was determined by the experiment. So keep in mind whenever I am talking about underestimate, overestimate, smaller, better, anything, these are in relation to the experimentally observed values. Okay, so how can you calculate the lattice parameters of a material? So you can do X-ray diffraction, and then you can actually fit it, and then you can find out what is the value of the crystal, what is basically the type of crystal structure, and the lattice parameters also. And through this density functional theory calculation, you can also try to find out what is the ground state behavior, and then you can see whether the lattice parameters in both cases are matching or not. Okay. So it was observed that these lattice parameters are sometimes underestimated and it overestimates the binding energy. So binding energy is something which actually helps you to bind the electrons to an atom. So let's say if I have to kind of knock off one electron, let's the valence electron I have to take out of the system. So how much energy I have to cost? Okay. So there are two quantities. One is called as I think ionization potential, and other is binding energy. Okay. So very simplistically, as the name suggests, that how much energy it will cost to bind something here. Okay. So that in some cases also it can happen that suppose you have a given material A, okay, and then you have another material B that actually tries to form a bond here. So how much energy cost is involved there? So that can also be called as some sort of a binding energy. Okay, so there is some under or overestimation of these two. So what are the good and bad things of this LDA or LSDA? Let us see. So it can predict the ground state geometry. It can give us the charge density. So charge density means that let's say you have a lattice and then you have certain atoms and around that you have electrons which are located. And what will be the distribution of this electronic cloud, or let's say the effectively charge distribution around different atoms or in different around different atoms? That actually can be mapped from this. Okay, so that is also correctly predicted by LDA. So it is usually better than Hartree-Fock, and equilibrium distances are well calculated. Okay, now the shortcomings are that it underestimates band gap. So let's say if you are talking about a semiconducting material, then the value of band gap which is estimated sometimes is low. And for some materials, let's say iron oxide and cobalt oxide, it was observed that the prediction is not completely correct. And of course, the binding energy overestimation which I mentioned in the last slide, that is of course is there. So there are few shortcomings, but overall we see that this is a good approximation and it gives a kind of behavior we can actually estimate under the LD. So let us look at the next one. So here this approximation is called as generalized gradient approximation. So this is quite popular, or you can say kind of most popular approximation which is used. So earlier we have seen, or we have assumed, that the density is homogeneous and it is uniform, or let's say very slowly varying in space. But here the variation of the electron density is considered, and it is assumed that density can vary rapidly in real systems. Okay, so it means that GGA, it does not only take into account rho r, but also the variation of rho in real space, that is del rho r. So let's say we have electron density that is, let's say, varying in space somehow. Okay. So earlier what we are doing is that we are kind of assuming a constant value, but here it can actually takes care of the variation, because when you are basically calculating del rho, then let's say del rho del r will tell you what sort of variation, whether it is zero or it is non-zero. Okay, that will tell you. Now, how it is done? It is done through a Taylor series expansion of rho r. So you all know what is a Taylor series expansion, that you have some mean or value or equilibrium position around which you expand it. So you get the first order term, second order term, third order term, and depending on the level of variation, you can take the approximation up to first order or higher order. Okay. And here also, if you take into account the spin part, then you can define this exchange correlation functional by this, which is a function of rho up and rho down. Basically, so here this says that GEA, which means that this is a generalized expansion approximation, because you are approximating through Taylor series. So here, this exchange correlation function energy will be a sum of this integral of rho r EXC, which is a function of rho up and rho down, integrated over dq bar, plus sum over sigma sigma prime c xc sigma sigma prime, which is a function of rho rho prime, and then gradient of both of these integrated over dq bar. Okay, so here this sigma and sigma prime, these are basically indices for up and down spins. So these are generalized notations which are used. So you can see that the variation with respect to space is also taken into account. So in GGA, we can finally write down the expression for exchange correlation functional as EXCGGA, which is a function of rho up and rho down, will be rho r EXC, which is a function of rho up, rho down, then del rho up, del rho down. Okay, and then you can finally get this expression, which is equal to integral over rho r epsilon xc homogeneous rho r, then fxc rho up, which is a function of rho up, rho down, del rho up, del rho down dq bar. So here this term fxc, this is a dimensionless quantity, and this epsilon x homogeneous is the exchange energy of the unpolarized gas. That means there is no variation. Okay. So here effectively what we are getting is that we are taking into account the spatial variation also, in addition to homogeneous part. So in a very simple or crude manner, we can just write down that E exchange correlation functional will be half of the contribution from the rho up and rho down part. And it is observed that GGA, of course, it gives better result than LTA. And specifically for D and F electrons, which means that materials which have, let's say, D electron, that means tungsten metal elements, or F electron, which are like lanthanide actinides, they are quite heavy elements, so they have strong electron correlation due to interatomic Coulomb repulsion. So for them, you have to add an additional term that is defined by U, and this method becomes GJ plus U. So it offers a very good agreement for this particular systems. So that is what is density functional theory in very, let's say, brief, or let's say, in a nutshell. So is there any question on this? Okay, so let us look at what we have actually done. We are trying to predict the behavior of an electron system. So in density functional theory, what we are estimating is the ground state energy and the electron density. Okay, so that is by optimizing the exchange, the total energy functional by rho r, which is giving the minimum value. Now, once you have the rho r, then actually you can calculate many properties. So effectively rho r and psi ks, which is the constant orbitals, they are effectively same quantity. And from there you can also calculate something called as the band structure. And you know what is the band structure, that basically you have this atomic potential, or let's say in a crystal lattice the electrons are facing basically potential, and as a result the energy band structure it appears in a solid material. So here from density functional theory, once you get the rho, or let's say psi, then you can actually calculate what will be the energy values of the ground state and let's say different excited state along certain specific directions. Okay, so usually you can see that this band structure is plotted on the y-axis. You have the energy, and on the x-axis you have something written like yeah, like this gamma, x, k, etc. Okay, so what are these things? So these are basically some points in the reciprocal space. Let's say if I think about a cubic unit cell, then the center of this cubic lattice, that is called as the gamma point. Okay, so let's say we can call it as the origin or 0, 0, 0 point here in kx, ky, kz. And then the center of the one of the basically face, that is the x point, and this corner that is called as r point, and this middle point of one of the sides is called as the m point. So effectively what we are doing is that when you are calculating band structure or plotting it, we are effectively taking this particular direction and we are estimating how does the energy varies if I move from this to this point. Okay, or let's say this particular direction, or let's say that particular direction. Okay, so these are called as high symmetry points. Why? Because along these directions the chances of having maximum number of atoms are large. Okay, so let's say I can go along any random direction. Let's say I can go along like this particular direction. Okay, but here I am never going to encounter another atom. Okay, so that is why it is called as less symmetry. So if I think of a big lattice, so there will be large number of such unit cells, and then what will be the chances of having let's say more number of atoms. So that tells me the direction which will be of high symmetry. So I hope that part is clear. Okay, so now there is another thing which you get from here, that is called as Fermi surface. So you are familiar with Fermi energy EF, and Fermi surface is but that is one particular value. But keep in mind that if I am talking about a 3D system, then depending on the crystal structure and the atomic orientations, this energy landscape will also vary. So effectively you can get this a complicated kind of surface sometimes. So that is called as Fermi surface. And if we take cut along different high symmetry directions, then effectively we get the band structure. So here is a schematic which is plotted here. So you can see basically there are different bands like this. So and these bands have different curvature. So like for example, usually we are interested more around the bands around the Fermi level. So here you can basically get to know whether the material is semiconducting or metallic, and what sort of curvature it is giving, and whether it's a direct or indirect band gap semiconductor, things like that. Okay, and you can also define the band gap. Now the question comes that okay, so you are saying that I can estimate the band structure, but what advantage does it give me? Like what do I do by knowing the band structure? Okay, so of course, as I said, that you can calculate various properties like band gap, then carrier effective mass, mobility, then Fermi energy level, various quantities, and experimentally you can actually reproduce this thing through an experiment that is called as RPACE. So the full form, it is angle dissolved photo emission spectroscopy. Okay, so I do not know whether you have covered this thing in your experimental technique course or not. So here what you do is that it's basically a spectroscopy. As you know, basically in a spectroscopy, basically you have to some excitation that will hit and then you detect something. So here you have the crystal and then you try to map the scattering that is happening, and as a result you can get the let's say behavior of the Fermi surface, and let's say exactly Fermi surface you can map actually. Okay, so if you are interested you can actually read this thing, and from there you can actually get this kind of band structure and you can compare it with your DFT calculated values, and you can see what sort of agreement that is appearing here or not. So another useful property which you get is called as density of states. So you probably know what is the density of states, that the number of states per unit volume at a given energy, or say per unit energy. Okay, so higher the density, higher will be the chances of occupation. Now, usually, let's say if it is a semiconducting material, then you will have almost negligible or absence of energy states between a certain window around the Fermi level. However, if it is a metallic state, then you will have non-zero contribution at the Fermi level. So those things also you can get to know from here, and you can also know about this something called as projected density of states, which means that let's say in your material you have certain elements, two or three elements which are present, and which of these orbitals are contributing what percentage of this density of states at what given energy. Okay, so these individual contributions at a given energy value, that contribution specifically is determined by this quantity which is called as PDOS, or let's say projected density of states. Now, the next quantity which you can estimate is called as charge density. So, as I said, that you have these atoms which are distributed, and how the electron cloud is forming around that, and what sort of hybridization is happening. These sorts of things you can actually get to know from this charge density profile. So these are, of course, few basics. There are a lot more. For example, you can also estimate the magnetic properties. For example, whether the material will be ferromagnetic or paramagnetic or antiferromagnetic. These things, and then of course you can also estimate the size of magnetic moment. And then you can using that you can also get to know whether this material what is the critical temperature, if there is any, and other things. Then you can of course estimate the electrical property. For example, what will be the transmission spectrum. So let's say at a given energy how much transmission will happen from this particular system, and effectively what will be the current that you can generate out of it. Okay, so those things you can also estimate. Next, you can get to know a lot about the optical properties. For example, whether this material has UV sensitive or IR sensitive. So, and then refractive index, then optical conductivity, and dielectric constant. There are many things you can actually estimate. Then transport properties you can also estimate. So, so this transport could be again electrical transport or thermal transport. And in addition, you can also get to know about the thermal properties. For example, whether this material, what is the thermal conductivity, what is the specificity, these sorts of things. Then mechanical properties, like how whether it is mechanically strong or weak, what is the Young's modulus value, what is the value of Poisson's ratio, what's the critical strain, and kind of like yeah, like what is the material is ductile, or it's a soft material or hard material, those sorts of things. And yeah, anisotropy, there are a lot of things actually you can calculate. So the list is endless. Okay, so here only there are some parts which I try to cover. So once you have the ground state electron density, then you can actually use that to find out these sorts of behavior. So you can actually think of something like in a StatMech system, you have an ensemble, and you get the partition function. So once you have the partition function, you can calculate the free energy and a lot of other parameters. Okay, so here also is similar in nature. Of course, little bit of difference is there. For example, let's say if I want to know the thermal transport, or let's say transport properties, then I have to probably apply some external excitations. The system will be little bit non-equilibrium in that case. So that is a little bit different, but overall the idea is the same. Okay, so what we learn from here, that all these techniques, that means let's say Hartree-Fock, then density functional theory, they are basically quantum mechanical method of calculating the system behavior, and they have widespread applications in different areas, like physics, chemistry, in material. So materials, wherever it is, it could be material science, it could be materials engineering. So these techniques are quite useful, and they can have application in these areas like energy, then of course technological relevance, and the electronics. They have huge kind of like dominance. So for example, predicting material properties, they are of huge technological importance also. Okay, and recently you probably have heard of there is this discovery of these 2D materials. Of course, it's not very recent; it's more than 15 years now. But they're very popular and they have huge technological importance. And this particular techniques have been quite useful in determining the properties of 2D materials and predicting their behavior, things like that. And also recently, there are topological properties which are also being predicted through different techniques. Okay, so the scopes are endless. And here is this book, which actually I told you a few days back, that Electronic Structure of Materials by Dr. Rajendra Prasad. So you can actually try to follow this book, but I think you can probably get a copy of this somehow. Let me know if you can find one. If you don't have, then I'll try to see if I have one. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So with this, I will finish this part. Let me know if you have any question. Okay. So it looks like you don't have any question. And
Yes, sir.
okay. Yes.
Uh, Can you explain the term topological properties?
Topological property. Okay.
Yes.
So, do you know what is topology? Okay.
No, sir.
So,
Just
let us think of this like it's basically a mathematical term. So, let's say suppose I have a particular object. So let's say it could be a sphere or it could be ball. Okay, and that particular shape of or let's say the surface have certain topological degree of freedom. Okay, so essentially, let's say if I have a mug, okay, coffee mug, that can be converted into certain objects without actually disturbing the complete texture. Okay. So that is of course a mathematical context, but let us look at from a material perspective. So usually the material system which we are mostly talking about in this context is called as topological insulator. Okay. So I hope you heard this term, right? Have you heard about this term or not?
mm,
Little bit.
yes.
No,
Okay,
sir.
so let's see what is an insulator. So as you know that insulators are basically the materials. So let's say if this is the energy band structure. Okay, so I have this conduction and valence band, and this gap between this is quite large, right? So typically this is in, let's say, 5 to 10 electron volt, or even larger than that. Okay, so what it means is that typically for a semiconductor, what happens is that this gap size is quite low. So then it will be typically, let's say, 1 to 2 electron volt, and as a result, you can actually have small excitation, and you can have some desired level of current. For example, let's say when we are talking about silicon or germanium, the band gap is typically, let's say, around 1 electron volt, which means that if I apply 1 volt of bias or let's little more than that, then I'll be able to conduct an electricity or current around this, because then there will be jump of carriers from this valence band to the conduction band. Okay. However, for the insulators, this gap size is quite large, and as a result, the number of free carriers which are available for conduction will also be quite smaller in numbers. Okay, so I hope this part is clear to you, right? Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that is why you don't usually see a large amount of current from in insulator. Let's say it could be an alumina, it could be some brick or something. Okay. However, in the case of topological insulator, what happens is that there are two, not two actually, there is one unique part. So it is actually insulator from the bulk, but due to some topological features, okay, or let's say some intrinsic structural degree of freedom of this system, it does conduct electricity. Okay, so let us see. So let's say if this is my material, okay, so within the material, or let's say those electrons or atoms which are located deep inside this, they are insulating in nature. Okay, so they will not very easily conduct electricity or current. However, those ones which are located on the surface, they can actually carry current or electricity very fast. Okay, so that's what it is, that on the surface it behaves like a conductor. However, within the material it behaves like an insulator. So now what happens in this case is that if you look at the band structure, so let's say this is the band here, okay, for an insulator. So here what happens is that this band structure, they actually have some sort of an overlap. Okay, so this is the valence band and this is the conduction band, and as a result, actually, if I just plot this thing again, so what I can get is that, okay, and then let me get another color. Here maybe, okay, so you see this part here. So there are 2 points at which basically this point at that point, there is a crossing there, right? Okay, so here, because of this overlap, this band structure effectively, it kind of has some sort of touching point here. However, that part which actually intersects, it kind of inverses its curvature. Okay, so if you remember, this part of the band was earlier belonging to the valence band, right? So similarly, this bottom part was belonging to the conduction band, but because of this overlap, this part of the valence band, it now becomes part of the top one, and this lower part, it becomes part of the valence band. Okay, so now here what happens is that you see a small band gap, so that is typically in the order of the order of milli electron volt. So let's say 5 milli, 10 milli electron volt. So that is called as a non-trivial band gap, because it is not something which is intrinsically appearing in the system, but it happens as a result of this overlap, or let's say you can also call this as something called as band inversion. Okay, and now here if you look at these points here, the bands are actually overlapping, and as a result what happens is that you see the slope of these bands are quite large. Okay, so for example, let's say if I'm talking about this particular line, okay, let's say this particular line, or let's say that particular line, or let's say this particular line, or that particular line, then the slope is quite large. Okay, now keep in mind, this is basically an energy versus, what is an x-axis? Anyone?
K.
Yes. What is k?
So the wave vector.
Wave vector. Okay, so here let's see, for this particular band del E del K, okay, if you calculate, and let's say for this particular band, if you calculate del E del K, which one will be large? Anyone? Okay, what I'm asking is, you have something like this, okay, and you have something like that, okay. So the slope of which of these two is larger?
Second one. Just
Second one, right? So why is it taking that long to say? So if the slope is large,
hello.
this means that the dispersion is usually found to be linear in this case. Okay, so usually for these things, E usually goes as k square. Okay, so you know probably that E is how much? H cross square k square by 12. In this case, it actually is much faster. So what happens as a result of that is that the mobility of these carriers will be quite large if such band inversion happens. Okay, so these carriers can move very fast. So that is why you will have very fast moving charge carriers on the surface, but deep inside the material it will behave as an insulator. So that is the topological features, or it is appearing as a result of certain intrinsic symmetry which is protecting the material. Okay, is this part clear? So
Yes, sir.
that is why if you look at the band structure of graphene, you can see that there is some cone-like features that is appearing. Okay, so this is not the correct one, not the wrong one also, but it's not the nicest way to plot it. So let's say if I plot it, I can actually you have probably seen this thing like in graphene. The band structure looks like that. So this point is called as Dirac point. Okay, so here this is also some sort of a topological feature. So because they overlap like in this manner, so that is why this mobility, or let's say the effective mass, it becomes quite large. So they behave almost like a relativistic particle. Okay, is it clear? So effectively on the surface they behave like a conductor, but deep inside the material they behave as an insulator. Okay, is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Any other question? Okay. Okay then. I believe then we can finish this thing. So I'll share the PPT and you will read it and let me know if you have any questions. And yeah, in the so tomorrow I believe is holiday, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. So then we'll meet in the next week and we'll start about the last section of our syllabus, which is molecular spectra. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.